Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Caitlin Lyons.
Tonight, the president en route back to Washington after balking at U.S. intelligence on bomb damage to Iran.
It could be severe, or maybe it's not. So people like you picked up and said, oh, it's not severe. No, the report was not a complete report.
Somebody somewhere is trying to leak something to say, oh, with low confidence, we think maybe it's moderate. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran.
The administration tonight doubling down on its assertions Iran's nuclear sites were obliterated by last week's attacks. This as the president now says the administration will hold talks with Iran. Much more on that and the concession from NATO leaders Trump was able to garner. We'll speak with Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth, member of the Foreign Relations Committee, straight ahead.
Plus, the president seeking a win here at home as the Senate inches closer to finalizing the one big beautiful bill. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent meeting with members of the SALT caucus today, pushing for a deal as the clock ticks down to that self-imposed July 4th deadline. Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender joins us with more.
And the surprise win out of New York as a 33-year-old Democratic socialist is now poised to become the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor. National Democrats taking stock, the president now also weighing in.
But we begin this evening with the after effects of the president's NATO trip, with Trump sent to arrive back in Washington this evening after telling the world of his intention to have the U.S. meet with Iranian officials as soon as next week. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is joining us live from the White House with more. And Tyler, we're still awaiting details as to what exactly that meeting will entail.
Yeah, hey, Kelly, exactly right. President Trump had confirmed earlier that the U.S. and Iran do have planned talks next week. But the thing is, we're still waiting on some pretty critical details, including where and when those discussions will take place. President Trump did indicate he's not in a rush to sign a new nuclear deal and even downplayed the prospect that a new agreement is needed, saying, in his view, that the war is over.
The way I look at it, they fought, the war's done, and you know, I could get a statement that they're not going to go nuclear. We're probably going to ask for that, but they're not going to be doing it. But they're not going to be doing it anyway. They've had it. They've had it. Now, maybe someday in the future we'll want that.
The White House has made the case the strikes demolished Iran's nuclear program, with President Trump disputing a preliminary U.S. defense assessment, which found the operation had a limited impact. A source tells Bloomberg News the findings suggest the strikes set Iran's nuclear ambitions back several months to a year. Analysts tell us it will take time for a more comprehensive assessment, and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard posted on X, saying in part, if Iran wanted to rebuild, they would need to rebuild all three facilities, which would likely take years to do. For now, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is holding. But Joe and Kaylee, an outstanding question here is what happened to Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium. President Trump earlier in his remarks did suggest that it was buried in the attack, but we have heard from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, that says there is a possibility that that stockpile was moved.
Tyler, bring us back to the Netherlands for a moment and President Trump's inclination to get other NATO members to pay more. 5% was the new target. It sounds like everyone but Spain is on board. Is that right?
Right, exactly, Joe. So this is considered to be a pretty big win for this White House, since President Trump has long lobbied for our NATO allies to boost their defense spending to 5%. So that's 3.5% for core defense spending and 1.5% for other sorts of investments, including infrastructure or cybersecurity, which might mean that some of these allies have a little bit more leeway when it comes to this, considering that we heard from one, as you mentioned, Spain, raising concerns about lifting its defense spending up to that 5% goal. Now, President Trump did threaten that if Spain does not meet that goal, he could enforce some trade policies against them, use this as leverage in tariff negotiations. But at this point, it's unclear what that would look like, considering that Spain is negotiating as part of the European Union.
All right, Tyler, great reporting live from the North Lawn of a sweltering White House. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Of course, Iran was not the only major topic the president touched on in his news conference today, with Trump weighing in on the Fed once more. Here was his latest criticism of Fed Chair Jay Powell.
Yeah, I know within 3 or 4 people who I'm going to pick. I mean, he goes out pretty soon, fortunately, because I think he's terrible. We have no inflation. We have a tremendous economy.
Those comments occurring just moments before Chair Powell testified on Capitol Hill for a second day. This time before the Senate Banking Committee. Listen to what he had to say today about the impact of tariffs on inflation.
The question is, who's going to pay for the tariffs? Originally, it's the importer, but it gets passed along through the distribution chain to some extent to the consumer. The ultimate question of it is how much of it does show up in inflation. And honestly, it's very hard to predict that in advance.
Joining us now with reaction from the White House in our studio here is Michael Faulkender, Deputy Treasury Secretary. I'm glad we can keep you out of the 100-degree weather outside on the North Lawn. It's great to see you, and I appreciate your coming in. We'd like to ask you about a few things, the latest on the reconciliation process with regard to what we just heard from Jay Powell. The Fed is concerned that higher prices are coming because of tariffs. Great uncertainty, as we keep hearing. Are you also concerned?
We aren't, because if you look at the inflation data that we've had come in so far, even after the April 2nd timeframe when the president announced the tariff rates that were being implemented, the inflation numbers that came in May show us that we're at a 4-year low. And so if indeed we were going to have seen the impacts of that, it should have already started, and it hasn't. This is very consistent with what we saw in 2018, in 2019, when the president imposed the initial round of tariffs on China. Again, we had record low inflation. We had great growth. We had great job creation and employment growth during that time frame. Wages performed excellent during the first term prior to the pandemic, and we did all that while implementing tariffs. And so we are not worried about it. Those tariffs were largely absorbed by the producers themselves and not passed on to consumers. And so far, we're looking at pretty good inflation data that's come out.
July 9th is coming up pretty quickly. That was the deadline to negotiate these deals with the U.S.'s various trading partners. Is it Treasury's expectation that our average tariff rate is going to end up being lower or higher after that date? And how does that factor in not just to the economic outlook, but the fiscal outlook, as we also consider the way in which that interacts with the legislative agenda the president is trying to push?
Right. So if you look at the tariff rates that we anticipate going forward as a result of our negotiations, is that they would come down significantly from what they were announced on April 2nd. And so these negotiations, with the exception of the Chinese, we saw the rest of the world come to us and negotiate and bring to the table many of their non-tariff barriers that previously they had been unwilling to negotiate over. And so as a result, we continue to make very strong progress. Obviously, China instead decided to retaliate. And so you saw a number of back and forth increases in tariff rates. Ultimately, the secretary led a delegation over to both Switzerland as well as to London to have 2 rounds of negotiations with the Chinese. And so we're in this pause right now while we continue to work out the terms of a broader deal. But for the most part, I think you're going to see that as these negotiations take place and countries are willing to bring down their non-tariff barriers and their legislative level of tariffs, but more importantly, some of these non-tariff barriers, then I think you'll see that the tariff rates will come in lower than what the president announced.
You're spinning a couple of plates right now. Kayleigh mentions the deadline on July 9th. You've got another one on July 4th. I think we're calling a deadline, and that's for the president's so-called big, beautiful bill. Reconciliation is underway right now, and I know you held an important meeting today with stakeholders on this. We'd like to drill down on this, but just broadly. Sure. When there's so much confusion over so many components of this bill, and I know this is a family matter, Republicans are working out everything from SALT to Medicaid to permanence. What's going to happen to this timeline? Because we're starting to hear that it's sliding and that this July 4th might be a different kind of celebration.
No, we continue to look at the Senate taking it up this weekend, hopefully opening up that debate tomorrow. And if we get that bill done by the Senate over the weekend, then we should still be on track for the House to come back and pass it themselves and still look for a signing ceremony by the president on July 4th. We are not at all moving away from that time frame because the negotiations we continue to have continue to narrow the set of issues that need to be resolved. And as you said, we had the SALT caucus members over to the Treasury Department earlier today, met with Secretary Besant. We continue to have some ongoing discussions about where there are areas of compromise that could be had, what dials can we turn in order to meet the needs of both the House and the Senate in order to get that compromise language done in the next 24 hours.
Well, one of the SALT caucus members, Congressman Nick Lota of New York, said he still sees the House and Senate as being far from a deal on SALT. And our understanding is this caucus is waiting on some options from the Treasury Department as to what this deal could look like. What are those options?
Right. And so one of the most important reasons for Treasury to be involved is because, we have the tax data that we can run. As we think about turning some of these different dials, we can then run those new parameters through tax data, and we can figure out
so
what
dials
is the
like the income threshold?
Dials like the income threshold, the amount of the deduction, the phase out, the time frame, all of the different parameters that are going to go into what the ultimate compromise might contain. We can run various permutations of it and see not only what is the fiscal impact of it, but we can also look at the impact on who pays how much, right? So what part, what is the impact on it for different income distributions, right? So, and we can even understand that at the level of the state or at the level of the congressional district, so that we can really narrow down and have conversations with members about here is how this compromise form of the construct would impact taxpayers in your district.
I don't know when that needs to get done, or when the president starts picking up the phone to the New York delegation or the New Jersey delegation for that matter. There are so many what ifs here, including what if this bill doesn't pass? And it's something that I discussed today with someone you sat down with, Jay Timmons, who runs the National Association of Manufacturers, joined us here on our early edition of Balance of Power after his visit to the Treasury, and a stark warning to what would take place if we did not see this bill pass. Let's listen to Jay Timmons.
We've broken it down state by state, district by district. So members know exactly what is at stake here in terms of the number of manufacturing jobs that they will lose in their congressional district if they vote no, right? How much investment could potentially be lost? All that information is there for them to see.
Are you asking the likes of Jay Timmons to start knocking on doors to try to sell this bill? And is the president going to walk in data like that or get on the phone with data like that to lawmakers?
So we had a great conversation with Jay and a number of his members today to understand exactly how factories around this country would be impacted if we do not get this bill over the finish line. And to talk about not just the benefits we saw after the 2017 Act, but some of the new provisions that are in this bill and how it would impact the investments that they make. And we know full well failure is not an option. We are going to get this bill done because we are not going to have a $4.5 trillion tax increase at the end of this year, and we are not going to default on our debt. We always need to remember this reconciliation bill contains an extension of the debt ceiling, and we at Treasury have already told Congress that you need to get this done before you go on your August recess. So we anticipate that we are going to continue to work 24/7, as the president has said. We'll lock people in a room and get it done. But we continue to believe that we are going to have a breakthrough very shortly, so that we keep on track for our July 4th timeframe for the president signing this.
Yep, no one goes on vacation until this thing is done, to quote the president directly. Michael Faulkender, thank you so much for joining us here in our Washington, D.C. studio, the Deputy Treasury Secretary of the United States. And coming up, we'll take a look at New York City's mayoral race and the 33-year-old progressive poised to become the Democratic nominee. We'll bring you those details. But first, we'll head to Capitol Hill for more on what's next for President Trump's tax bill. We'll discuss with Republican Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining. President Trump notching one victory from the NATO summit in the Netherlands this week, getting countries to commit to greater defense spending. But it's a win here in Washington he's after, trying to push the Senate to pass its big, beautiful bill. And joining us now with the latest on this saga, live from the Capitol, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. Erik, we were just talking to the Deputy Treasury Secretary, who tells us that the timeline is intact. What are you hearing on the Hill?
You know, there's a bit of talk of maybe voting on Friday, begin voting on Friday in the Senate and passing it through the weekend. But a lot of this depends on these really arcane Senate rules. They need to have a full score from the Congressional Budget Office in order to do that. These wonks at the Congressional Budget Office are taking their time. They're having to change the bill, both for political reasons and technical reasons. So, you know, that could come into doubt. The House is planning to go home, come back maybe Tuesday and vote on this. So I think that, you know, they could still, pass this by July 4th, which is the president's goal. But there's a bit of a slippage as they that try to negotiate things like the SALT cap, like energy credits, like this new hospital fund that could, appease the moderates who are worried about Medicaid cuts.
Erik, just quickly, when we consider some of the things the parliamentarian has taken out of the bill, those were supposed to be revenue-raising measures to offset tax cuts in many cases. So what kind of final price tag are we realistically looking at here?
Well, we know that it's going to be about $4.2 trillion in tax cuts. That number could go up by a couple $100 billion depending on this SALT deal. The assumption there is that the SALT cap's at $10,000. But then we're looking at the spending cuts. One of the big things that came out was changes to food stamps. This would have penalized states that have error rates, that sort of fail to vet undocumented immigrants from getting food stamps. That was thrown out by the Senate parliamentarian, about $40 billion there. That may be back in due to some adjustments. There's a lot of back and forth between the policy staff on the committees and the parliamentarian to try to rectify some of this. But yes, a lot of the provisions that were spending cuts are being moved out of the bill, and that's causing some consternation from conservatives. Ron Johnson, talked to him extensively from Wisconsin, very upset, wants to push this bill into late July in order to deal with his concerns. We'll see if that view prevails.
All right, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson, thank you so much. And as Senate Republicans are preparing and working on releasing their version of this tax bill, Senate Democrats are making their case against it, both to the public and to the Senate parliamentarian we were just discussing. Here's what some of those Senate Democrats said earlier today.
Why the rush? Well, we believe they don't really want to have people know what's in it. When they find out what's in it in America, they hate this bill.
This Republican budget bill will result in cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, all designed to make health care harder to get and more expensive.
If I can sum up this bill, it's the red carpet for billionaires and it's red tape for ordinary Americans.
All of that, Joe, pointing to a way in which Democrats are planning to message against Republicans in midterms next year. And there's been reporting in the last few days that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is actually actively warning his colleagues in the Senate about having too many changes in the bill and that potentially risking the House majority in 2026.
A lot on the line here with a very slim majority in the House. Kaylee, we still haven't seen the Senate bill, which makes it pretty difficult for the House to reflect on what's coming.
Yes, but we're still going to ask some reflections of our next guest anyway. Joining us now for more insight into how the Senate's changes to this bill will be received by the House is Republican Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Is there any form in which this bill could return to your chamber that would make it a non-starter for you, a no vote?
Well, I think there are a number of things that could make it difficult when the bill comes back. We've got some concerns with provider taxes. We've got concerns with HSAs being not included in the Senate version. But I think at the end of the day, Speaker Johnson, House Republicans, we've been encouraging our colleagues in the Senate to try to stick with the plan that the House laid out as much as possible to give this bill the glide path necessary to get to the president's desk by July 4th.
Congresswoman, welcome. It's great to see you. And I'd like to ask you a little bit more about that provider tax issue, because this hits home to so many members, Republican and Democrat, of course. In your case, we're looking at your district, Ascension St. Vincent Jennings, Ascension St. Vincent Salem, and Harrison County Hospital, all falling in your district with concerns that they could feel a real pinch if the provider tax is changed. There's talk now about a stabilization fund that could be offered to facilities like this in districts like yours. Is that the answer?
You know, when it came out of the House, we froze the provider taxes. We understand that maybe we want to switch to a new paradigm on this process, but we're not ready to do that yet. So if it's a stabilization fund, I'm going to hear from my hospitals back home. They're not happy with the Senate proposed version of this bill. We've heard from them loud and clear. We heard from them on the House side. This is a funding mechanism that keeps our rural hospitals alive. So whether we like the mechanism or not, we do have to give something in return or something in its place, and we're not ready to do that yet. So I think that what the Senate is doing goes too far. I'd like to see them dial it back to the House version.
Well, when we consider what else the Senate is doing, we know that they feel differently about the SALT cap than a few of your select colleagues in the House. And I'm sure you feel differently about SALT as a representative from Indiana and not from a blue state like New York or California. But how great is your concern if there are changes made to the SALT cap that the votes will not be there with your slim majority when this bill ultimately does return to you?
Well, I've been in these negotiations and conversations for the past several months. SALT on our side has always been a factor in negotiations. It's why it was included on the House side. It's why it was negotiated on our side. So, even up into the last minute, we were negotiating on SALT. So I think it's going to have to be something the Senate will consider, which is why we're saying to the Senate, please do not upset the apple cart by making dramatic changes to a bill that barely got out of the House. We want to get this done. We put together a good framework that the president supports, and we need to get it to his desk.
Well, it does seem interesting as you look across to the upper chamber here, Congresswoman, and wait for what's coming. And I know you already had to thread several needles on the House side. There's some agita as to what might be coming next. And we talked about that on the early edition of Balance of Power today with your colleague from Wisconsin, Republican Congressman Brian Stile, about the idea of the Senate jamming the House. Here's what he said.
I don't view this as the Senate being in a position to jam the House. The Senate is making adjustments and amendments to a House product. So it origined in the House. I think that's a positive thing. When these adjustments come back, it'll be an opportunity for us to most likely have an up or down vote. Overall, like I said, no one's going to get 100% of what they want in this legislation. The question of the vote is going to be, does the bill at its core move the country in the right direction? I believe the House version did, and I'm optimistic I'll be able to reach the same conclusion when the Senate bill is finalized.
So how's this going to work, Congresswoman? We're not hearing about a conference committee. Are you going to have to vote on whatever the Senate sends back?
Well, I think we'll see what product they send to us, and I think we'll determine what happens at that point. We've already seen colleagues like Mr. Stile, like Chip Roy, who have some framework of some concerns. We have the SALT caucus, so we have a lot of things still out there. One thing that I would say is that, yes, it's going to be a good step. There's no perfect bill. We're going to try to get this as close to the House version as possible. I hope the Senate will do that. We have a few sticking points: IRA tax credits, Medicaid reforms, the provider taxes, and SALT. I think the Senate should quickly get to a point of giving us language that we can consider. If we have to go to conference committee, I would say we will, but and we're all prepared to do that to get the right product. But we shouldn't have to do that if the Senate gets their work done. And I'm certainly grateful that the House pushed for one big, beautiful bill rather than two packages, so we can be sure that we will get tax relief permanency.
Well, if there is a chance this does ultimately have to end up in conference committee, Congresswoman, what would you put the probability around this going beyond the self-imposed July 4th deadline?
If we have to go to conference committee, I think the probability of going past July 4th is higher, certainly. So that's why we can continue to encourage our Senate colleagues to not make dramatic changes to the House product. Send us back something that we can all support. It was passed very narrowly out of the House. They should follow that framework. Let's get this done, and then we can actually celebrate the birth of our nation on July 4th and be very happy about the success of this perfect, one big, beautiful bill.
Going to have to get some work done, some fast work, Congresswoman. Thanks for joining us to talk about it. Republican Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana, we thank you. Coming up on Balance of Power, we turn to New York. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo conceding to Zoran Mamdani in the New York City mayoral primary. An upset, a surprise. The headlines are over the top, and we'll discuss what that means for the future of the Democratic Party, never mind the city, when we assemble our political panel next. It's straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. As we turn to stories we're following here at Bloomberg today, first, BP shares surging as much as 10% after the Wall Street Journal reported the company was in early-stage talks for an acquisition by Shell. Those gains were mostly erased after Shell denied that report. A potential merger would mark one of the largest deals since the ExxonMobil merger and potentially create an oil major to rival industry leaders. BP's been under intense shareholder pressure after years of poor performance. A strategy reset was announced in February to a lukewarm reception. Shell stock has outpaced competitors Chevron and Exxon throughout recent years, still falls short, though, in total valuation.
And Democratic Congresswoman LaMonica MacGyver of New Jersey pleaded not guilty to federal charges that she interfered with law enforcement outside an immigration detention facility in Newark. A trial date is now set for November 10th. The Congresswoman was charged after a May 9th congressional oversight visit erupted into a scuffle between agents and protesters at the facility.
And Zoran Mamdani declared victory in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary after his top opponent, the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, conceded the race hours after the polls closed last night.
Tonight was not our night. Tonight was Assemblyman Mamdani's night, and he put together a great campaign.
We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford. A city where they can do more than just struggle. One where those who toil in the night can enjoy the fruits of their labor in the day.
Mamdani won almost 44% of the first round of votes, short of the necessary 50% threshold. Voters will now have to wait a week or more for an official winner as the city tallies the ranked choice ballots. The success of the young progressive self-proclaimed Democratic socialist over an establishment-backed candidate is sparking a big conversation in New York, here in Washington, and around the country over the future of the Democratic Party. That is where we start with our political panel. Matt Gorman is with us, Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory, a Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Aisha Mills, founder, CEO of Community Asset Management. It's great to see you both, and welcome back to Balance of Power. Aisha, you said you were not surprised by this result. Why were the polls so far off?
Well, you know, polls will poll. But if you actually watched what was happening on the ground with Mamdani's campaign over the last several months, you would have seen him take fire. I was shocked. I believe it was the New York Times that actually did an article on where everybody's dollars were coming from that were in this primary. And this candidate was collecting donations, small and medium-sized and large, of New York,
Seems we're having
which is unprecedented. It's pretty. Oh, am I breaking up on you guys? It's pretty unheard of.
We got you now.
So the fact. You got me now. So the fact that Mamdani was raising money all across the city in small dollar donations was just an initial real testament to the type of broad support that he had from everyone. And so that was the first cue for me that something was really at foot here, that was about a groundswell of people being really tired of the establishment, which is what Cuomo represented. And then the second thing I'll just share with you that was really interesting is that if you look at how the candidates kind of paired off or quadded off and started to co-endorse one another, you saw a progressive Jew co-endorse Mamdani, who happens to be Muslim. And then you saw these coalition come together of folks that said, okay, well, we're doing ranked choice right now. Let's jump in and support each other because we know we'll all be great for New York City. And that coalition is ultimately what's going to win him, presumably, in the general.
Well, as we consider the general election and ultimately what kind of foil Mamdani could be if he does become mayor of New York City for a Republican administration, Matt, President Trump took to Truth Social today saying it finally happened. The Democrats have crossed the line. He went on to call Mamdani someone who looks terrible. He says his voice is grating. He's not very smart. Clearly not a ringing endorsement of this individual. But still, does that speak to this being potential catnip for the Republican Party?
Oh, this is great. You're going to see him all over ads between, if he wins, certainly for the next couple of years, but at least for the next couple of months. I mean, and keep in mind, too, this doesn't really help writ large a lot of the Democratic Party's problems. Andrew Cuomo won a lot of the working class vote in a lot of the more diverse areas of the city. Yeah. Mamdani was the candidate of white liberals, especially the Upper East Side, Upper West Side. So, you know, Democrats don't have a problem reaching those folks nationally. Where they lost nationally was those working class voters, people of color. So there's still that problem is absolutely still there. What I'm curious is Cuomo doesn't seem to be running in the general, most likely. That's, you know, like that.
So you don't buy the independent bid?
I don't buy. He got beat too badly, in my opinion. If it was 4 points, somewhere on that, he could make a rationale. But then what happens with Eric Adams? Curtis Sliwa. Sliwa's tone is very different. We normally hear a lot of bombast from him. He talked a lot about affordability. So he's taking page out of Mamdani there. And Eric Adams, man, you can't keep that guy down. He's still around, and who knows? He could pull this out.
Absolutely. They're the four faces now. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube. Aisha, the platform, free buses, free childcare, city-run grocery stores, rent freezes, wealth taxes. It sounds a lot like the mayor of Boston, to be honest with you, but New York is not Boston. And Michelle Wu would probably have a difficult time forming that same coalition in Manhattan and in the surrounding boroughs. How does he fare in a general election with this platform and these ideas? Nobody's got a free tea in Boston yet, by the way.
Well, listen, these ideas really reflect where Americans are. They are frustrated with the lack of affordability. And most importantly, they're frustrated with the establishment and with corporate power. And so what you're seeing playing out in this campaign is that it's really a campaign for everybody and providing solutions for everyone. And what it's saying is like, look, hey, we believe that government should work for everybody and should mitigate greed. And we know that part of the challenge with affordability in New York City is greed and privatization and a certain corporate power that, frankly, Cuomo represented and reflected, and those were his folks in this race, which is why I believe he was rejected, that they're providing an alternative to that. And so I think that this, it is a progressive but populist tone that is resonating with folks from all walks of life, young people, old people, again, across all 5 boroughs, from, you know, Staten Island all the way up to the top of the Bronx, and so much in between. And I think that that is the conversation that is being tested here with regards to the Democrats. Can the Democrats win by talking about the kitchen table issues of affordability? You know, 10 years ago, the conversation in New York was that the rent was too damn high and the rent is still too high. That's really what he's bringing back. And can Democrats really win on that message? I think that we just saw that they can, certainly in a primary within the Democratic primary. And that conversation is resonating all across America, no matter who is it's talking, you know, who's using those talking points. So I think the policies are really what the people are into.
Well, so if this actually comes down to an affordability problem at the end of the day, Matt, does that actually potentially spell trouble for a president that campaigned on making the economy better for people, and that polling suggests people feel he has not actually been able to accomplish yet, that they aren't necessarily happy with his handling?
Everybody wants prices down. It's a matter of how you do it, right? Do you just give free stuff away? Eventually you're going to run out of other people's money, because as we've already seen, Palm Beach is wide open. Florida's wide open. You go there anytime you want. Even that was what Kathy Hochul was worried about when she mentioned it just about a week or two ago. She doesn't want to have more of the tax base cascading into Florida. And let's remember here, the last 3 New York mayors ran for president. Like that is a very visible job. And so even if Mamdani doesn't want to be the spokesperson of the Democratic Party if he's elected, even if the Democrats don't want him to be either, he's going to have an outsized role. And so a lot of the stuff you hear from him now, a lot of the stuff you heard from him in the last 5 years is going to come back, and that's going to be a big poster child. No prisons, defund the police. A lot of that stuff we've run very successful campaigns against in the past.
You mentioned, Aisha, the cross-endorsing, referring to Brad Lander, the city's controller, who did speak last night, maybe taking a page from Donald Trump with aim at Andrew Cuomo. Here's what he said.
Andrew Cuomo is in the past. He is not the present or future of New York City. Good riddance.
I don't know what the F words are all about this week in American politics, Aisha, but Brad Lander finished 3rd. Is he right about the former governor?
Absolutely. And let's remember, okay, that this comeback, you know, I don't know why Cuomo thought that he was really going to be the comeback kid, and that everybody was going to forget why he was gone in the first place. There are so many women who came out and accused Cuomo of sexual harassment. That's why he ended up stepping down as governor. He went and kind of licked his wounds and hid out for a while and thought that everybody was going to forget about that, but they didn't. And that's still a stain, a moral stain. And how can you have a mayor, how can Democrats elect a mayor to like really go up up against this image of Donald Trump that is someone who has some of the same issues, frankly, that Donald Trump had to fight against as well. And so I think that there is absolutely a values basis that this base of Democrats that voted in this primary are exuding as well about the type of leader that matters. It's not just dress up the same old corporate guy who's got some corruption going on or some accusations going on, whether he be Republican or Democrat, and we're just going to go with him. It's no, we reject fundamentally those kind of mean-spirited individuals and people who have a lot of drama with them. And we have disdain for that. Those aren't the values that reflect who we are as people and as a city. And I don't think anyone wants to be led by him.
Just one final question, Matt, on the money here, because there was some big money behind Andrew Cuomo, including, I should mention, Michael Bloomberg, who endorsed him and contributed to a super PAC. He is the parent. He owns the parent company of this network. If he had that kind of money behind him, still couldn't pull off a victory in the primary, what does that signal about the way in which money still matters in politics when social media can be such a powerful force as it was for Mamdani?
I mean, let's be honest. Cuomo ran an awful campaign. He ran a god-awful campaign. You could have all the money in the world. I mean, I love Jeb Bush. I worked for Jeb Bush. He didn't run a great campaign. We had a lot of money. So Andrew Cuomo ran a terrible campaign. Still got 36% of the vote. Yeah. And again, was about to be impeached. She's absolutely right. Was a governor, a lot of problems during COVID, as we all know. And he still got that amount. So, look, the race was there for the taking. He just ran a terrible, terrible campaign.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Matt Gorman and Aisha Mills not holding back tonight. Thank you both so much for joining us. And still ahead, we'll turn back to our conversation on the tax bill fight with Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, and also ask her how she's watching the fragile truce in the Middle East. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Very historic milestone this week. The NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defense spending to that 5% of GDP, something that no one really thought possible. And they said, "You did it, sir, you did it." Well, I don't know if I did it, but I think I did.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, and that was President Trump earlier today, touting his accomplishment that NATO leaders have backed a plan to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP. The president is on the way back from the Netherlands to Washington now, posting on Truth Social while en route, teasing a press conference from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth scheduled for tomorrow morning. That's, of course, after Hegseth appeared alongside Trump at the news conference we were just hearing from at The Hague earlier today, and that's where Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern filed this report from.
In essence, it was Trump's summit, as his Secretary of State Marco Rubio said going into the NATO meeting at The Hague. There's a lot of flattery language given to the president, especially from Secretary General Mark Rutte, who really praised his insistence over the years for trying to convince the alliance to spend more. When they came out with a new defense to GDP target of 5%, devil is in the details, though. 3.5% of that has to be used to build up military, hardcore ammunition, artillery, and the likes. 1.5% of that, though, there's a little bit more leeway of where those funds can go to, maybe towards cybersecurity or border patrol or infrastructure that supports the country's defense industrial complex. But the cloud overhanging this NATO summit, of course, was the geopolitical uncertainty happening in the Middle East. And that is what the president dealt with at his press conference. A tremendous amount of time and questions were spent on what is going on in regards to Iran. I asked the president if his maximum pressure campaign on Iran will continue.
Yesterday, you said China can now continue to purchase oil from Iran.
Yeah.
Are you giving up on your maximum pressure campaign? Because there are sanctions right now.
With who?
On Iran.
No, look, they just had a war. The war was fought. They fought it bravely. I'm not giving up. They're in the oil business. I mean, I could stop it if I wanted. I could sell China the oil myself. I don't want to do that. They're going to need money to put that country back into shape. We want to see that happen. Would it? No. If they're going to sell oil, they're going to sell oil. We're not taking over the oil. We could have, you know. I used to say with Iraq, keep the oil. I could say it here, too. We could have kept the oil. No, China is going to want to buy oil. They can buy it from us. They can buy it from other people. But you're going to have to put that country back into shape. It desperately needs money.
Flanked by his defense secretary and secretary of state, the president maintains that that report that said that the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities only set back their program by months was preliminary and inconclusive. Annmarie Hordern, Bloomberg News, The Hague.
Great to have Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern in the Netherlands. We thank you, Annmarie, and joining us now for more on how Congress is watching the latest coming out of the Middle East is Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, a retired Army National Guard lieutenant colonel, Iraq War veteran, also a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I know you have many questions that you're seeking answers to here from your perch on the committee and as a veteran. And there's a briefing that we understand is set for tomorrow. It's already been postponed once with the CIA director, along with the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other Trump administration officials. Will that briefing happen, as far as you know? And what questions do you have?
I'm not sure if it's going to happen. I hope it does. He has a responsibility to come back to Congress. The problem is we're just hearing just within the last hour that Trump does not plan on bringing any members of the intelligence community to the briefing, and that he's only going to be sending Secretary Hegseth, which is ironic because if you want to deal with leaks, Hegseth is not the guy to send to a briefing.
Well, as we consider leaks, we've seen reporting today that the president is not going to be sharing the same level of intelligence with Congress out of concern for leaks of classified information like that preliminary report. Senator, what is your reaction to that? If this is a time in which information should be withheld from a co-equal branch of government?
It should not be withheld. And the only leaks that have happened have come out of the Trump administration. The only people who have not adhered to intelligence security standards is Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe and all of the Trump administration officials and Marco Rubio, all the people who are on that Signal chat chain. They're the people who have violated intelligence security procedures. Now, that said, there's a lot of data that's already out there that contradicts what the president said today. There's video and there's footage, there's pictures of the days leading up to the attack of the Iranians moving what we now know is 880 pounds of highly enriched uranium. You can tell that from the footage. It's been the pictures, the photos of the convoys that were moving the uranium. We also know they still have thousands of centrifuges. So no matter what they come up with for the assessment post-strike, we know that at least 880 pounds of highly enriched uranium was moved, and now we don't know where that uranium has gotten to. So those are some of the questions I would be asking at the briefing, should it happen tomorrow.
Well, it's interesting to hear you tell us that it might only be Secretary Pete Hegseth at the briefing tomorrow, because President Trump put on Truth Social a short time ago that Hegseth will be holding a news conference at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, what he calls a major news conference at the Pentagon, to fight for the dignity of our great American pilots. The president says these patriots were very upset, the words he used, at the questioning of whether this bombing raid, in fact, obliterated, to use the president's word, Iran's nuclear program. There are very few people we're going to talk to, Senator, who have your perspective, who know what it's like to fly an Army helicopter in combat and to be badly wounded in combat. What is the president talking about when he says these pilots are offended? How should we interpret these words?
The president is lying. If he were telling the truth, listen, those pilots did their jobs. They dropped the munitions where they were supposed to drop. The mission went off exactly the way they needed to execute the mission. The problem is we have a president of the United States who sort of tipped his hands to the Iranians, and 4 days before, they actually had moved the highly enriched uranium before the attack even happened. You have a president who is using our military for political gains. And by the way, the agreement that happened, the ceasefire that exists right now, is between Israel and Iran. It doesn't actually cover U.S. troops. We have over 250 Illinois National Guardsmen in the Middle East right now. They are under greater threat than when this attack happened. And so let's be clear, Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does, which is he's trying to distract you. He's trying to get you to look over here when really the truth is right in front of you. And the truth is that he did not destroy Iran's nuclear capability. And in fact, he has united our adversaries, countries like North Korea, like Russia, like the PRC, to come together to help Iran move even faster and more quickly towards gaining nuclear weapons. And by the way, he still hasn't answered my question of what happened to the 880 pounds of highly enriched uranium that the Iranians were able to move before the attack happened.
Well, we would all love to know the answer to that question, Senator, but you just mentioned troops in the Middle East being in greater risk of danger now. Where do you see that danger emanating from? Is it from the Islamic Republic itself, from proxies like the Houthis, or from potential terrorism threats?
I think it's from all of the above. I think Iran can let off their restraints off of all of their proxies. And I think that you're going to see that more attacks on American interests around the world, but in particular U.S. troops who are stationed in the Middle East right now. And again, I want to reiterate, most people think that there's a ceasefire. The ceasefire is only between Iran and Israel. The ceasefire isn't against Iran continuing to launch rockets to attack American troops like they did when they launched rockets towards Qatar. And so let's make it clear that Donald Trump has put more Americans in greater danger now than they were in before he launched this attack.
Senator, beyond the briefing that you are anticipating for tomorrow, the Senate has some pretty important work ahead in the next couple of days to get to this reconciliation bill. And I'd like to ask your input on this, knowing that Democrats are not actually part of this process. That's the essence of reconciliation, with Republicans keeping this all in the family. Changes to Medicare, Medicaid, I should say, are a big question right now, along with changes to the provider tax. And we've seen some numbers from Illinois Healthcare and Family Services under a per capita cap on the estimated expenditures. Initial projections show Illinois could lose as much as $39 billion in federal funds from 26 through 2034. What are you anticipating in Illinois? What will be the impact of this bill if it passes in its current form?
We know that 30% of the safety net hospitals around the country, including Illinois, will either have to shut down or shut down major parts of their operations, such as their emergency rooms or obstetrics. We know that potentially as many as 800,000 Illinoisans will be kicked off the Medicaid rolls. And by the way, in neighboring states like Missouri, the number is as high as 400,000. You're going to see people try to get health care and who are not going to be able to get health care for themselves or for their children. And many of these safety net hospitals, by the way, are the last healthcare facility standing in a rural area. They're the last hospital in a tri-county or quad-county area. So people are going to find themselves waking up one day and realizing that they're now 100 miles away from where they can give birth. And by the way, this isn't just the people who are on Medicaid. When these hospitals shut down, they're gone. It means that people who have, whatever your health insurance card says, it could say Blue Cross Blue Shield, it could say Aetna, whatever it is, even if it doesn't say Medicaid, you won't have access because the healthcare facility will no longer be there. Obstetrics is a good example. Medicaid pays for 40% of the births in this country. Any hospital that loses 40% of its revenue is going to have to shut down those departments. And so whether or not you have private insurance, you're going to find yourself in this country unable to access health care.
Senator, we just have 30 seconds left, but have you heard from your Republican colleagues like Tom Tillis or Josh Hawley who share some of your views on this issue, that they're willing to tank the bill over it?
Well, I hope that they're willing to tank the bill, but neither one has been a profile in courage when it comes to many of the previous votes we've had. They say all the right things. They go on TV. They say all the right things on TV. And at the end of the day, they do what Donald Trump tells them to do. And they vote along with what Donald Trump tells them to do, which in this case, by the way, is going to be a tax cuts of upwards of $250,000 for the top 0.5% of this country, and is going to actually cause millions. I think the numbers are somewhere around 18 million Americans lose Medicaid.
All right, Senator, we appreciate your time. Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, thank you so much. And you can get more coverage of the tax bill in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal, or online. Thanks
for being with us on Balance of Power. We'll meet you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.